Okay, we're just launching right into it. So it was already live. Super Serba. I love that you put that.
I usually don't get the option to post like a subtitle or whatever it's called.
Yeah, it's something they just added. I was looking.
Oh,
I had one on. I don't know when they update or whatever, but yeah,
I've seen
Super
it
Serba. Nice.
in other forums or whatever. I've seen people use those. David Wood uses them a lot, like as like the Dizzle or something, some ridiculous nonsense, which is great. But
Yeah.
yes, I had to use this opportunity.
Nice. Yeah, great. I'll leave it open from now on. I think it's a nice thing. Yeah. Cool. So it's been a little while since the last stream. Is it? So I'm assuming it's probably hotter there than it is here now, huh?
I'm not sure how hot it is there.
Let's see. I took a long walk today.
Here it's about 36 degrees.
33 here. So we're a little bit.
Okay. Yeah. That's not much of a difference, but we have, as I said, a storm incoming. So if I just freeze up, it can be either the internet went out or the power went out. So we should be prepared for that eventuality.
Okay. Yeah, here it's pretty clear, but we have had quite an array of beautiful storms this year, like stuff that just blows in like in an instant, you know.
Yes, it's been really forming at the base of the Alps to the south, and then blowing things either our way, as in through Croatia and then northern Serbia, all the way to Romania. And a lot of it has been going northwards after the Alps into Germany.
Yeah.
Austria and Germany, I mean. So it's been great.
yeah, I really enjoyed it too. How has the river been? Did it get near flooding there?
Well, I'm in an extremely it's not really mountainous, but it's really hilly, let's say. So we rarely get flooding. Unfortunately, as the cemetery has expanded, a part of it does get flooded fairly regularly because it got really near to the river. But we don't have. I make jokes about how in my city, Prokuplje, like when we see more than 5 square feet of flat land, it's sacred land because there's so little of it. We've got like 3 streets that aren't either uphill or downhill, depends on your perspective, doesn't it? But that's not on an incline. So we don't tend to get a lot of flood damage. Here at least, but there's surrounding villages, there's places that do, but it mostly stuck to more northern parts of Serbia, whereas here in the south, not really.
Yeah, Drava was getting, I think it was up 2 meters from what it is now. Maybe I'm exaggerating, but it was definitely, the river beach was gone, and then some of the beach bars were jacking up and putting their buildings on bricks and things like this, and it got pretty high up.
So our river Toplica, it emerges, not sure what, with springs, right, on Kopaonik. You might have heard of Kopaonik. It's a pretty famous skiing destination.
Okay. Yeah.
So we tend to get most of our flooding after winter when the snows there start to melt, which tends to be quite a bit late into the spring because you need time for it to get warm enough there to start melting everything. But that tends to cause most problems. But if you ever visit here, you'll see that the river is there's not really a river bank. It's more like this giant. I don't know what you would call it actually. my English breaks down in the most practical of places. Quite a bit of room for it to grow, and it did grow quite a bit. We did have rivers destroying bridges and stuff, not here, but in other parts of Serbia. So it's been wild. And this one comes after quite a bit of time. We haven't even had rain for a couple of weeks. So it's probably going to be quite an event.
Yeah, it's I hope we get some more rain here. It looks like it's going to get up to 37 this weekend. It says.
Oh yes, it's getting cooler next week.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not having to work in the fields or anything, so I don't envy those people.
Nope.
But at the same time, I know it's an interesting topic, this thing about weather, and it kind of can tie into what I wanted to discuss today. This idea of struggle and patience, yes. And the word long suffering and all this, and weather's like well, in some ways, some of the people I work with, there's usually a point where they catch themselves, and then they stop complaining about weather. Mm-hmm. It's not something I generally instruct people on, although I'll give that as a hint sometimes to people. Like one idea was to record yourself anytime you hear someone else or yourself complaining about weather, to just record the statements. And then after 1 year, listen back to it. And then you'll hear, like, during each season, generally, there's...
yeah, it comes cyclically, doesn't it? My best friend and I, we make jokes about ourselves because every summer we long for the winter, and every winter we long for the summer.
Yeah, exactly.
We are aware that we're, sorry to say, but bitching. We're perfectly aware of it. But we sort of parody ourselves.
Yeah, someone called me out a little bit when I was doing, like, I'll do flippant posts on Facebook just to kind of
vent,
draw out a conversation, or whatever. Not so much to vent, but sometimes, yeah. I said I was going to complain about a particular form of complaining, for example. I mean, I see the irony in this. But yeah, someone said, like, well, maybe it's actually a factor of connection between humans, that they have something to, maybe it's an icebreaker for conversation, or a way to not have to go too deep with something, just reflect on the weather.
Yes, and I don't know how common this is, but in the Balkans, like, complaining is the conversation starter and the conversation topic. And then the conclusion probably won't be complaining, but, I'm not sure. There's other cultures which are much more cold, so to speak, especially as you get more into Protestant territory, historical Protestant territory, like the
You mean cold weather-wise or cold personality-wise?
They tend to correlate for some reason.
Yeah.
There's probably some anthropological reason for that as well. But also, I see it more as a function of historical Lutheranism. So in Germany, there's Catholic Germany, and then there's Protestant Germany. And when people think of Germany, they either think of, like, cold, dead-eyed, people who only work all the time. And that's when they're thinking of the Protestant Germans. And then they think of the happy, sausage-eating, beer-drinking, lederhosen wearing, people who play the Oompa music, and accordions. And that's the Catholic part, and they're very jovial. That's Bavaria, right? Which is the richest part of Germany. So much for that whole Protestant work ethic stuff. And you clearly see that this is how religion forms people. And I'm going to guess that if you don't believe actually in the existence of free will, that tends to form a culture in a particular direction. Mm-hmm. I think last time, or maybe the time before it, we spoke of how people in those parts, the Protestant parts, like, don't share food. Like, you have children who come over, and you don't feed them, which would literally be scandalous here.
Yeah.
My childhood best friend and I, we would always because we're neighbors. We would always go to my house and then his house and choose where we would eat, depending on what's for lunch and stuff.
Ah, that's so cool. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's so common, and like you hear from people up there, they say no, I visit a friend and then he'd go down to eat with his family and I'd wait in the room or something, and
Wow.
that's shocking to me. Honestly,
Yeah.
I couldn't. I don't think they do it out of malice. I don't think it breeds malice.
No.
But I think it's sort of what they see as proper.
Yeah.
So as long as people see stuff as proper, it's not going to be some type of horrific, sinful thing. But I still think it's the wrong way to go, and that should be changed.
Yeah, I mean, back in Minnesota, growing up, if I recall correctly, there was always some kind of. Well, we were generally playing outside, even in winter times, or even in rain, as far as I remember now. And then somebody's
Especially at
mom.
winter time.
Yeah, exactly. With the snow and everything, it was awesome. But I remember the moms coming out, and they'd bring like cookies and sandwiches and or fruit or something like this. There was always something. It was a little more formal to go get invited to dinner at someone else's house. It was, and it would depend because then there's all the mix of religions and stuff. So sometimes if you're like secular kid and then you get invited to the weird Christian house, you don't know what's going to happen. Are they going to ask you to say grace or something? And it's rituals that we're unfamiliar with. But yeah, generally it was the food sharing was something I grew up with. I can't speak for the rest of the country. I don't know what those trends are. And I'd imagine things have shifted a little bit with internet and all that.
Yes, and it was seen as incredibly poor form, here at least, to go outside and eat unless you have enough to share. I remember, as you were saying, we would play outside, and I was hurrying up to eat my supper, to go outside. And I sort of was eating this sandwich and I wanted to go out and, finish it on the way. And my grandmother stops me, starts shouting at me, what are you doing? Like, I'm going outside to play. She says, you're not allowed outside until you finish that because you shouldn't eat in front of others unless you have enough to share. And so I wasted at least 2 minutes of my life, eating that sandwich, standing up. I don't know how I'll ever get those 2 minutes back, but it is what it is. But I just that's proper culture forming.
Yeah,
I'm not sure how things are going to develop in the future as we get to this whole rationalistic approach to ethics. Because I don't think it's going to fix anything as long as you see it as an option. All of these people who they get angry at us for questioning their ethics, what they base it on or in, and they say, this has been a topic both on my streams and on Jim Bob streams. At least when I jump on, I really push this whole idea of appealing to obviousness. And the question of, do I really need to tell you why murder is wrong? Yes, in fact, you do, because we have no shortage of cultures that didn't see killing, at least for reasons that we would see as completely unacceptable, to kill someone over, like insults and stuff.
Right, like in some Viking cultures and some tribal cultures.
Well, it's more common than uncommon to find such things. And you have to understand that insult and your name being sullied was a much worse thing back in the day, because your reputation was all you had. That would determine, how people perceived you, whether you could be trustworthy. That's why people really, really took insults much more seriously than we do today. So that's definitely something to take into account. But what would you tell those people if you went back in the day and just said, "Oh, you're wrong. Why? You can't kill people over an insult. Why? Well, it's not. It's just nonsense. Why?" The old Socratean, why? until you reach a point where you just have to say, well, it is because it is, and you've reached circularity, and in the system of that they operate in, that's a disqualifier. You're gone. As far as your opinions are concerned, this is no longer a viable opinion to hold, right? So when we think of ethics, this is all going to tie in, as you said, we were going to talk about struggle and long suffering. But as long as you're going to keep your opinions as merely what's currently useful, that lacks any sense of permanence and constancy. And because of that, you will shift them according to need, right? Whereas we had, my body, my choice, we saw that in the last couple of years really fell apart.
Yeah.
Why? Because, well, no, you don't, because it affects other people. Well, the abortion position is completely based on other people. The unborn child is another people.
As well as the future health of the mother, which is usually
yes, but they will say for that that they get to choose to risk it.
Right. Yeah, right. To risk the emotional devastation and the spiritual suffering.
And they compare it to things like tumors, which is just ungodly. Why you can't risk it to have a tumor removed? Like, how are you comparing an unborn child to a tumor? I mean, honestly, and we are seeing, of course, if the weather doesn't do me in, I'll probably do a stream tonight and talk about planned or unplanned obsolescence. If you haven't heard the term planned obsolescence, you have.
You can please explain for the listeners anyway. It's a fascinating concept. Yeah.
Yes, it's basically the idea that you create something with a purposeful idea or time span for it to operate and fail plannedly. So not let's try to make it as long lasting as it can be, and we know it will fail at some point. No, you plan it becoming obsolete. That's the planned obsolescence part. And I think that this type of thinking, which is very common in capitalism, by the way, I'm no lover of socialism, but there's a clear profit incentive to construct things in such a manner that they should fail and you need to replace them. One very common thing that everyone seems to notice is how refrigerators, back in the 70s, they still work, a lot of them.
Yeah, they still work now. You can buy them on Yushkalo here. I mean,
So a couple of weeks ago, our stove broke down, and electric stove. And until the replacement arrived, we used one that's older than I am, right? It was bought somewhere in the early 90s. And it works, no problem. It's sitting right there, and it's usually nothing more than a glorified shelf. And but you turn it on, no problem whatsoever. But nowadays they last for a couple of years at best, and usually tend to fail very soon after the warranty wears off. So that's the whole thing, and I believe that it's led us into the intellectual realm where we now have unplanned obsolescence. The same mindset is there, but it's so ingrained that you don't actually plan it. You just operate in a similar manner that it does fail, and we see that with progressive values. There's nothing in progressivism that is ever permanent. Their slogans are so broad that they can never address anything. They just have vagaries upon vagaries. And we see that it actually has pretty significant consequences when we're talking about transitioning children, right? Right. And I recently saw two pretty liberal people, right? So the classical liberal types debate two progressives, and the liberals support like adults transitioning, which I don't. But okay, much healthier than saying children should be able to.
Right.
And the two progressives, of course, support transitioning children. And then when people start saying, okay, what, how will you deal with things like children who are diagnosed with gender dysphoria, which I don't doubt exists, but especially for this reason, uh, 80 to 90% of them lose it after going through puberty.
Yeah.
So obviously, this was caused either by certain events in pre-pubescent childhood, or when they reach puberty. Like so many things start happening that obviously, and I think especially for girls, when they're we tend to just grow, right? We as men, and start getting hair where we hadn't before. But with girls, it's so much more drastic, and then they start getting male attention that they're completely unaccustomed to, and I can see how that really bothers them. And maybe you think, oh, if there was this girl who testified in Congress recently, who said that very thing, but she underwent the double mastectomy, so her breasts were removed, right? She took testosterone and stuff, so her voice dropped a bit. Because she took it so early on, right? After you went through puberty, there's no changing your voice unless you go through some physical surgery into your vocal cords. But nevertheless, this child was undergoing maybe a bit more extreme versions of what we all go through, and you've decided to mutilate her.
Yeah.
And there's no guarantee that she will ever have fertility. Certainly won't be able to breastfeed. That's gone. And you see so many things. Sorry for ranting about this, but
no, please, man, it's fine.
I'm really miffed about it. We've seen the homo with the pink hair who's a surgeon, sort of saying we're figuring out what works and what doesn't. I'm talking about children being, I mean, such flippancy, and people who try to tell them, progressives, again, back to our idea of unplanned obsolescence, sort of say, well, you can have a mastectomy, but you can have breast implants later on. Well, what skin are you going to use if you never develop your breasts? And you've actually removed it. You've stopped yourself from having enough skin for the breast implants, right? You can have them sort of layered on from grafted, from other parts of your body, but that's not going to work. Like you don't have a skin. You have all types of skin all around your body. We all know that. Like your eyelids are not the same type of skin as the soles of your feet. But and they just said, well, we'll see how it works out, in 10 and 20 years. Oh yes, let's mutilate children, potentially, right? Mutilate children. But this girl's parents were told, because they weren't, progressive idiots, right? So when their child sort of talks to them about it, they're like, okay, we'll visit a professional. And the doctor said, you're either going to have a transgender son or a dead daughter. And that's the type of person, I joke around like this a lot, but that's the type of person you beat to death. Like that, I'm not joking about that. I mean, Lord have mercy, of course, but everyone can repent. I always try to think of St. Paul. He actually had Christians killed. That's we can try and say, well, but this is worse. There's no metric by which we can say it was worse.
Sure.
But I can't imagine the lack of regard. Well, actually, the excess of disregard, not just the lack of regard. It seems to be more active than passive. That we are seeing things unfold with this particular topic, And then with the topic of the COVID restrictions, which are allegedly going to come back,
Sure.
I don't see it happening.
I don't see it happen, especially out here. I can't really don't
Oh
see
yeah,
people going with that again.
I don't know if you know this, but in Serbia, when they want to reintroduce lockdowns, there was a massive riot that almost brought down the government.
Yeah, I saw
And
some footage of that. Yeah.
yeah, it was fun. But I'm sure Croatia won't take it either. Like there were a lot of Croats in like live streams that were sending support and regards. And
cool.
it takes a lot to bring Serbs and Croats together.
Right.
Usually
Exactly.
it's a common hatred for Islam, but you see this to that level. So I don't see it coming back. But that's the unplanned obsolescence, because what maybe people don't understand, Christianity brought in the idea that there's an arc of history. Pagans don't have that concept. You have in certain ones, but usually it's either cyclical. But this idea that there's a whole arc, as I said, of history is a very Christian concept. And I think with the loss of Christianity, we're losing the arc. We're losing the idea of things being planned for the future. And one of them is consumerism, which is certainly both fueled by and does fuel itself the planned obsolescence of things, of buildings. We see how things are constructed nowadays. They're all ugly, they're all mundane, to the point of, aesthetic crime. We see the same with our technology, and certainly we see it with worldviews being generated, where you will not take your worldview seriously anymore because you can switch it out at any point. Rant over.
No, this is all really good stuff. I'm making a note. So this can tie.
Oh wait, let me share this out. You talk while I do that.
Oh, okay. Share this out. What do you mean?
Share on my channel that we're here live. I forgot to do that.
Okay, yeah.
So cool, I said you talk while I.
Yes, I will. So So what I had in mind, and I'll just read the description a little bit here, and then that'll give me a refresher. But was this endless seeking that goes on, and I don't mean seeking within the bounds of let's say Orthodoxy or Christianity, but endless seeking. Like I used to be reading all kinds of occult stuff, New Age stuff, different systems, different practices, different approaches. And what I started to notice was almost all of them aim for, even the psychedelics, the drugs, all this kind of stuff. It creates a worldview where elated or intense emotional experience becomes the goal, and that's identified as spirituality. That the spiritual is an elated emotional experience. And with repeated exposure to that in Buddhism and in other various systems, when the feeling better and having an intense or related emotional experience are the goal of the system, or that's the pattern that the person has observed over all this process of seeking, when they do arrive at something like Orthodoxy or Christianity generally, and they're presented with the idea that actually internal struggle interspersed with possibly moments of grace or relief from that struggle, they have a real tough time even comprehending that could be something good. That could be the actual spiritual situation that we're in, and the spiritual path that will bring gifts and that will bring grace, and will bring, as Spirit and Bailey says it, joy beyond this world. So that's kind of fascinating to me. And I was one of those seekers, but I at least had enough, and thank God I at least had enough honesty to just ask questions along the way, and kind of and when I could see that I was not getting the promised experience, and that I could see other people weren't, but no one was willing to say anything about it because you had the authorities in the space and you paid your money or whatever. But yeah, then when I noticed from my entry into Christianity, at first I did fall into prelest, I can say, which is spiritual delusion, let's say, where I got into my head things like, oh, the Holy Spirit loves whiskey, because if it didn't, why would I be drinking whiskey, and like this kind of reasoning, and it was based on some of my previous seeking and not examining the worldview closely enough, where I could be into this delusion, and I'm not going completely against whiskey, but I can see now in retrospect, and having quit drinking and then kind of drank a couple times since then and then quit again, I noticed that it instantly made my cognitive functioning totally different. Like in the morning, I'm at church, and I can't put any blame on him, but one of the falling off the wagon was the priest and congregation just pushing the rakia. But
which is much harder to resist than whiskey, I have to say.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess I could have said I did try to say no, but I felt like such a nice experience every time after church. Maybe if I only drink it at church, then maybe I'll get there,
Yeah, but listen, the point is, it's if it's something that causes you personal distress, or it's a personal weakness of yours, that maybe just go completely turn off the faucet on that.
Yeah. Because what I noticed is it led to then later in the day, okay, I'm going to have a beer, that's fine, and then another, and then another, and then led into the next day. And then I noticed the motivation was gone again. And after the drinking, I realized I didn't care about the fast. I was like, I need to eat something, or I'm going to die here. And I didn't have food at home because I spent the day drinking, so I didn't go to the farmer's market. You know what I mean? It had a whole chain reaction of events. And then again, I saw that, really felt the delusion in that type of decision making, and then just dove back into the fast, And this relates to the struggle. It's that I noticed then there was some kind of thought process that's like, well, you already messed up the fast, so who cares? But then I'm like, no, get right back up again. Even if I drank some milk earlier, I didn't today, but if I happen to have made a mistake or actually fallen deliberately or otherwise, then there's this moment of like really recognizing what's going on, and then seeing there's a new option and standing back up again. And I liked something Cosmos said, which was, if you start to fall into hopelessness and despair, those are also demonic.
Can I teach you a little trick about that name? You say Cosmos. Because you pronounce. There's a strange thing with how Greek works, but that S becomes in front of an M becomes as like a Z sound. Right, but that's if you want to be the type of douchebag that says Afghanistan. Author Eric is here.
With the guttural, like the Afghanistan.
It's an aspirated G. Aspirated sounds are very interesting. I don't know if you saw Jim Bob's stream yesterday. He did an impromptu stream earlier on because his brother was coming over.
I did not see it. No.
Okay, so he showed a clip of Owen Benjamin saying how hell is from helio, which is healing, and saying that the church wants to lead you to the place you don't want to go, so maybe hell is the good place. First of all, beautiful etymology. But secondly, as we started developing the idea a bit more, I sort of lost my train of thought there because it's so funny, and I want to start arguing about etymology. Edmar Vasquez says, "Cheers, Garrett led me to orthodoxy. I'm very grateful. Excellent. You see, you are bringing people into the church, or at least to it.
All praise be to Christ. I don't want to get
Absolutely,
full of myself there, but yeah, it's a
it's
function
also,
of not wanting to lead anyone astray, and I
yes,
think
yes,
that's it. It's and you know what I mean. It's not. It's somewhere I arrived at, and everything I've shared over all these years of doing this particular business and being in the public space was at least trying to be honest. I can look back now and judge myself from the future and say, okay, oh, maybe that wasn't as honest as I could have been, or something like this. But I gave what I had up to the point of my knowledge, and then I
yeah,
noticed when I was discovering, deepening with Christianity, and then discovering Orthodoxy. It's not like I'm pushing it on anyone. I'm also not hiding it from anybody.
yes,
But certain people, when they break down enough of this chronic tension, so-called trauma of the childhood, and then the reactivity and the huge dependence on imagination and the life of the intellect, when they start to come back to a balanced reality, then those questions become much more important. Like, what is actually good? Like we started with,
yes.
what is truth, and what's when you get to those questions, then that's when I can say, okay, I'm not going to try to give uh, uh, an answer that I make up, but I can say, go check out this place. And what's really interesting is I noticed that almost everybody, when I do a search for wherever they live, there's some place, some Orthodox function within the driving distance. Generally, not
Coincidences.
every. Yeah.
Coincidences can be our friends, and coincidences, of course. But as we know, with all types of events happening around the world right now, coincidences just don't stop. It seems like lack of coincidence will become the exception to the rule. But
Right, right.
I want to mention, like earlier, you touched on scrupulosity. Like people who fall into. Actually, didn't. I wanted to sort of bring it into scrupulosity. But you said people make certain mistakes during fasting and then give
Yeah.
up, right? And then there's the other extreme, which is have you heard of Father Raffaello? He has that
Somebody mentioned
very
him the other day.
like giant beard. I think he's from Montenegro, but he has that very famous clip of if anyone asks you why you are fasting, you should hit them with a stick. So that's a very. It was one of his sermons. During liturgy, he's fully vested and stuff. But he mentions like people who for example, eat some type of confectionery or whatever, and they thought it was fine for Lent, but then they look at the contents, and it turns out it has like powdered milk or something,
Yeah, yeah.
and then they force themselves to vomit.
Oh no, that's
Right, and that's what I'm saying. The other extreme, the scrupulosity. And I remember this girl from my class back in high school. We were fasting for. We got a blessing for a 3-day water Lent to go to a monastery called Lipovica
okay.
or Lipovac, which, if I remember correctly, is actually consecrated to the Assumption of the Most Holy Theotokos, which is a running theme, it seems. But it's. Never mind that. I mean, we were given this blessing, and this friend from class, who was one of us who were going there, was eating this type of chocolate, and she says, "Oh, it says it contains traces of powdered milk." And what should I do? Sort of freaking out. And I said, "Well, you didn't do it on purpose, so just stop, give the chocolates to someone else, and carry on." People were always coming to me because I was the nerd, and also a reader, which helped. But that's the sort of mindset to have. It's not about dietary restrictions for the sake of dietary restrictions.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you're like me, as I said here and on J Bob's channel, I don't have a craving for eating sweet, like sweet
Mm-hmm.
in general, any
Yeah.
type. I didn't get hungover many times throughout my life when you wake up in the morning and then you sort of crave it. But other than those situations, I just don't have it. So me giving up sweets means nothing to me.
Yeah.
I sort of said it's like giving up on gay porn. You're not really giving up on stuff, are you? Well, if you are, well, that's a step in the right direction, but it would mean nothing to me to give those things up. So you're supposed to give things up that you don't like. And there are, for example, vegans and vegetarians, right, who are orthodox. And they try to make their sacrifices, by not seasoning it, or giving up on a particular food that they really enjoy.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of veganism or anything, but if this is the thing you've chosen, then you can see how you can still make sacrifices. And the whole idea of Lent is to give up things that aren't bad in and of themselves, right?
Yeah.
You're not supposed to stop doing bad things at Lent. You're not supposed to do bad things at all.
Right.
But things that are good, but are more luxury, so to speak. And that's what you give up, shortening, if you play a lot of video games, shorten that or give it up completely. That's something to work out with where you are spiritually. And just berating people doesn't really help. But that's the point of sacrifice and long suffering. That's the point of the struggle, to struggle against your urges, your temptations. That's the point. The point isn't to I don't know, try to get into this legislative, I don't know what to call it, spectrum where you're fine. People can have absolutely, again, no compulsion to drink, so giving up drinking doesn't really affect them. So it goes into multiple directions at any given point. So, and we talked about this maybe the first time I was on, before you were even baptized. Which you were, and glory to God.
Thank you. Yes.
Agreed. So, when we talked about how the lack of spirituality that exists in Protestantism has really done a number on their idea of what it means to be in a good place spiritually, and it became supplanted with emotions. So it's about joy, and you can see the extremes of it in Pentecostalism, where they writhe on the floor like madmen.
Yeah.
So they say, oh, that's what it feels like to be overcome by the Holy Spirit. Because for them, joy can only ever be happiness. And it's not the same thing. Joy and happiness are not the same thing. Joy is rather intense, but also very temporary. Like, you hear good news, you may feel elated for a while after hearing good news, but happiness is very intense, but very temporary. Joy can be constant, and even in the worst of times. So I think that's what you were more aiming for when you said we're talking about topics, such as struggle.
Right. And like what that you can take joy in struggle, and in a word that I think struggled with at first. Sorry about the pun, but a word that was challenging to me was the word long suffering, and I notice it has a positive valence. I like to describe words that way. If there's a positive, negative, or neutral valence to a word or series of words, it's kind of interesting way to look at it. But in my mind, it had a negative valence, but then when I read the definition, it was 100% used in a positive sense. and especially biblically, it's like as a desirable trait of in a person or in God. That is a godlike trait, long suffering, related to patience and all this. And that started to help me kind of unlock what the nature of the spiritual battle is. And again, I'll mention Jesse Lee just because I think he was the first one that stopped. He doesn't operate on, at least on neutral ground. He's saying, no, it's either good or evil. That's it. There's not like some gray area. The gray area is all evil, making excuses for some form of evil. So that was the first place I heard about it, but I didn't really deeply grasp it yet. And it's with
Yes.
Please go ahead.
Yes, because the idea of neutrality is completely rejected in multiple places in the scriptures. You know,
Mm-hmm.
ye who are neither hot nor warm, I will spit you out. Right?
Yeah.
That's what Christ says.
Mm-hmm.
Which, by the way, does not mean hot or cold water, as it meant. You know, lukewarm water is neither good, because you have uses for hot water, you have uses for cold water. You have no use for this lukewarm variety, which is nonsense. Not that the teaching is nonsense. I mean, how people react to it is sort of nonsensical. When you say you can go to the gray area, there's this morally neutral area. But also, people tend to take that verse and mean you are cold is bad, hot is good, as in burning with passion, you know, in the modern sense of the word passion, like burning with the Holy Spirit, with the zeal for Christ. Like, no. It's about cold can be good, hot can be good, lukewarm can't. There's no use for it. So that's one thing. St. Paul also says you can't dine at the table of God and demons, which is much more practical than we believe, because we're talking about a place where, you know, how you have coffee hour, you talk about the rakia and stuff. Like, that's a very common thing in the old world, not just with Christianity. Christianity also did this, but it wasn't particular to it. Right. Mm-hmm. So when St. Paul talks to the Corinthians, you know, and says you cannot eat, you know, at the table of demons, it was literally in their temples, because a lot of these temples had huge banquet halls, you know, that after you would have your rituals, you would feast and usually could involve other activities much less wholesome, and you do not have a Christian analog for. Like orgies, I mean. So, which is also something, you know, St. Paul reprimands, you know, these people for. And as suffering, I want to also give a bit of perspective from an etymological standpoint. That suffering, as we see it today, we just think of, you know, feeling bad or feeling pain, right? But suffer can just mean to tolerate, but as in like tolerate pain, right? Not as in tolerance is more commonly used today as, you know, tolerate. You know, it always has like a negative connotation. You know, you don't tolerate a person unless you actually dislike them or something that they're doing, right? Then tolerance would not be a word for it. You know, you have a tolerance for pain and negative things. Suffer is how we also have this connotation, but more in the extreme, which is where you get our modern way of using suffering almost exclusively, because it's now archaic to say things like Warhammer 40K, which I am a fan of, you know, has that saying, "Suffer not the heathen to live." Completely different religion, but you know, "Suffer not the heathen to live" means don't tolerate a heathen's being alive, right? So that's where we get long suffering. It's not just long pain. It's like long endurance could be a more modern way of saying it. And that's why we shouldn't seek out pain, but should tolerate it should come upon us. And the one we seek out is just rejection of temptations.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a nice description of that. And it's interesting to think about how to even apprehend this struggle, or how to present it for other people to because it is a positive thing. And I'm seeing it. One thing that's fascinating to me is seeing that confession is a sacrament, that it's elevated to that level, that it's an actual gift, for lack of a better word, that the church offers. That
mystery.
That also a mystery. And I went through all kinds of different ideas about it before really starting to understand or grasp what it is. And then I realized when and I had just scheduled for my first one, because I was baptized July 2nd, and then the first confession will be, I guess, on Sunday, the 27th. After, we'll have liturgy in the morning, then vespers in the evening, and then the confession. So I'm, and I guess I'm getting like a double dose, because I'm going to write it out first, and then I'm going to type it into the translator, and then I'll read it in Serbian or Croatian, to the priest.
Well,
and
yeah,
we'll have to see how I apprehend his answers, but I'll have to hold up the phone and have him speak into the translator.
Oh yeah, because you don't want to, like, even if he didn't understand, like, it would be fine, because he's supposed to be a witness. But definitely you should have someone assist you with translating it properly. So because miscommunication can be very easy when it translates things. So yes, good that they're asking you to have it translated, because you want the priest to understand it. Right.
Yeah, I want him to be aware of my progress, as I understand it, and to check in about certain things. And
or lack of progress, or even regress. Like, that's what a spiritual father is there to do, like to correct you, or just say, "Well done, keep at it."
we can deal with it. This is a topic I thought might arise because of my teacher in some of this bodywork stuff. He couched it all in the. This is just a little backstory. But he couched it in the occult. As I understood, as he got near the end of his life, he started to scrap all of that and focused only on the body work. And then I took it upon myself to remove all of that type of terminology and all that frame from what it is, because I wasn't willing to present it in that way, which is fascinating to me now that we had the wherewithal to do that. But someone in the chat is probably a fan of my teacher, Hyatt, God rest his soul. And he's preaching a little bit in the chat about dogma. He's referencing a text that Hyatt had written, but now then Ortho Eric. And so he said, I've read too much New Falcon. That was the publishing house, to buy into any dogma. And I think Hyatt was writing in the 70s and 80s, I believe, maybe more the 80s, 90s, but they were under attack from some types of Christian groups, I think, at that time. And so some of the earlier writings were couched in that. And it was, in defense of this kind of seeking and occult practices. And he was drawing on middle or 1500s, 12, 13, 14, 1500s grimoires, and somewhat couched in some old Christianity, this kind of stuff, and saying that the church took away the personal relationship with God, but these grimoires are evidence that we were supposed to go and fight the demons like Solomon and all this kind of stuff, so they had that sort of mindset. But so this Adonius in the chat is saying he's talking against dogma. And I liked Ortho Eric's response. He said, not buying into dogma is your strict dogma.
Yes, because people, as I said, there's a lack of permanence to modern ideas. They're meant to just be consumables. And exactly what Eric just gave the proper response, which is, anti-dogmatism is dogmatic, as much as saying there is no truth is a truth claim. Like these are these fundamentally self-refuting positions to hold. And dogma can be problematic in the sense that you have people who just say, oh, you're saved by faith alone, like the five solas or something. Sure. That's dogma. And then you have to challenge it, but you can't really challenge dogma, right? It's axiomatic. But you can see how it can become a problem.
Yeah.
Especially if you're surrounded by like fundamentalist Protestants.
Yeah, I see where that's the idea is that I think that Hyatt, and he was Jewish, and then later went to Israel, built a school. So there was some connection for him back to his religious roots, at least, which was interesting to me because people would have criticized that as well, as dogmatic, obviously. I was happy to see that he did at least get that far, to do some good, give some money for some school and return to some form of prayer and this kind of thing. And I felt like the net result of his work was alleviating confusion and this sort of thing. But I think he also lamented that he was stuck in the world of the occult, and that most of the people coming to him didn't want to do any of the actual physical work or the to remove themselves from the lies of the mind and to get rid of the actual chronic tensions in the body. They just wanted to worship his previous ideas. And I noticed he was somewhat angry about even being stuck in that position, but hoped that someone would just carry forward the physical work,
Yeah, because the attractiveness of the occult is you get at least modern instantiations of occultism, what we would consider occultism, right? Because mystery schools were very common. And, they weren't seen as bad things. Nowadays, we see it as bad because we're Christians and we should see them as bad things. But we're talking about from the perspective of pre-Christian Europe or Egypt or wherever. So mystery
like the Key of Solomon and this kind of stuff. Like
but that would be much later on. Very medieval. But also the attractiveness is in the fact that there's a mysteriousness to it. So not mystery as we would say, like the sacraments, right? We call them in Serbian, we call them svete tajne, right? The holy secrets, literally. But in the sense of it being inexplicable. But it's so mundane, right? With giant quotation marks, that there's nothing that promises you fun stuff, right? It's so level-headed in its operation and in its promises that people want to seek out, and it's always a function of pride. Magic is always an attempt to manipulate reality and make it conform to your own will.
That was the definition that Crowley put on it, and it's
a correct
very
one.
Clear. Yeah, it is a correct definition, and it's very clear that you're trying to get stuff or traits, maybe less so, but trying to get stuff through doing some kind of actions in the world, or some kinds of internal processes or thoughts or whatever it is.
Just to say a couple of things, there's magic and then there's fantasy magic. So I wouldn't read Tolkien and think he was promoting the occult,
right?
By having like the Astari with magic and then different types of like elves and the rings and stuff. So because they have magical properties, that's the fantasy magic, because it is used as usually a literary vehicle to show an idea, represent an idea. But at the same time, in real life, when people try to practice magic, like it can be for good purposes, so to speak, like trying to heal someone, right? People get very desperate when someone they love is very ill. There's also that. It's not always, oh, I want money and women, you know. But the demons don't care what you trip on, as long as you trip, and preferably bash your head as hard as possible. But it's all, even if it's good intentioned, you know, it's still manipulating, or an attempt to manipulate reality to conform to what you want. In Christianity, we don't guarantee healing, physical healing. We accept the will of God. That is why when we pray for someone to be healed, or when we try to bring a relic or a sacrament to someone who is ill, we don't say, oh, well, now they've received, you know, the Eucharist, that's it, you know, all the tumors are gone. And no, we do it hoping. It's very good to hope that someone will be healed. But if they aren't, if they die, we have to accept that. And we have to, that is where where the pride stops, and where the delineation is between praying or trying to use the instruments that the church has been given by God to heal someone, and trying to use all types of magics, you know, whether it be some sigil magic, whether it be some ritual of the non-sigil variety, or concoctions. You know, things get intense very quickly. You know, I know of many. Unfortunately, people freak out about the term pagan, because it tends to mean like outlander, like people in the boonies. And but thunder is starting. So I'm just saying, if I just freeze up, we have to accept God's will. When we're talking about lost my train of thought. What was I saying?
You were mentioning that people see
pagans. Yes. But that is still where you get most of the people practicing these types of rituals to this day, right? Old people, especially in, like, not even communism could wipe that stuff out.
Right. I noticed I met a lot of people from Bosnia and they told me stories of growing up where there was and they were either Catholic or Orthodox, the people I've talked to generally.
And Muslims do it as well.
Yeah. But I just haven't had as much contact with that culture out here. But the people I have met have told me all kinds of stories of these rituals, even some kind of blood ritual things when they were kids, because they had nightmares, you know, and these were like supposedly Christians, but, you know, turning to these type of rituals. And I heard stories about around Pirot in the mountains as well.
Oh, again, there's no shortage of these things anywhere. Like, because Islam came here via Turkey, you got this very weird type of Islam, right? It's weird in any sense, but as far as even for Islamic standards, the Turks are weird, right? You have that lead thing where you get lead and you pour it into water and it's supposed to do something. I'm not sure how it works exactly. Don't really want to know. But, you know, that's supposed to take away, you know, things like nightmares and stuff, or certain, I'm not sure how do you call them, like bunions or stuff, like when you get
like on the foot. Right.
Yes, like all sorts of rituals for that. And like what we call bayanye. You might not have heard of that, but it's sort of like this gibberish, half chanting thing that people like a warlock or someone will do, and that's supposed to help. Like again, these are very present. It hasn't been stomped out, because when people freak out, all of a sudden, you know, it shows that their belief in God is sort of cultural. And not actual and spiritual. So what you've described, there's all sorts of things with like dolls and stuff. Like, you know, you have parts where you have like, you're supposed to have a doll at the threshold of your house or whatever. You're supposed to walk over it. That's supposed to do stuff. And then you have the Wallachia, like Vlasi. And if you've not heard of the term Vlaška magia, then you've not heard of anything like those
Maybe
people.
I've heard that. Yeah, I don't know. It sounds familiar, actually. Someone might have mentioned this. But...
Yep.
there's a whole book. There was a whole book on this. I think I saw on Amazon or something.
Yes.
Yeah.
They're very famous for it. They tend to, they're not like gypsies. They're Romanian, some type of Romanian, right? Wallachians. If you look at historically where Wallachia was, it's Romania, right? And Vlaška magia is Wallachian magic, is very, very common amongst them. And people go to them if they freak out again, which is silly, but very dangerous, spiritually speaking. But like, even in my city, there's a place where they like a ghetto, and they refuse to let the local government put asphalt on the roads, because somehow that will disturb like magic and stuff. And like, if you go there, you'll find like chicken heads near the roads and stuff. So it's intense, but they don't joke around with it. But that's just to say, that's all a function of pride. And even when we think of pride as how shall we say? I won't say justified, but understandable. And as I said, that tends to be with healing and stuff. When you want someone to be healed, you sort of can't blame them, but it's still the wrong mindset to have. And they losing a close relative can be a form of long suffering.
Cosmas brought that up on one of the first talks I ever listened to of his. It was on near-death experiences, and the next one was about people turning to the occult. And he gave so many examples of when people were coming to him about demons, let's say, in their house or in their life or in their relationships. And then he said almost always he could tell when he's like, were you getting involved with some occult thing? Or did you go to some seer, some fortune teller?
Yep.
And almost every time...
No one slips into a demon, right? Yeah. No one just trips and, whoops, I landed on this sigil. Well, now I'm demon-possessed.
Right.
That's
exactly, yeah. It was willfully... there were occasions, he said, he made a joke about it, but there were occasions where he mentioned it was almost always related to the mother-in-law. There was some mother-in-law trying to break up the family, couple or the family, or make certain things happen. So sometimes it wasn't even the individual who was suffering from it who had gone to the occult, but he said very often when there was some kind of demonic affliction happening, then he would identify somebody in the family or someone very close had started turning to the occult.
Yes. And God allows that. God allows that to bring us, to confession. Someone asks, Deidre Hobson says, is there an act of contrition built in to confession? Of course. But all afflictions are there to bring us towards God. We are not, God doesn't enjoy it, but sometimes that's the only thing that will bring us down from a pedestal, like losing a loved one or being sick ourselves. And it's better, as we are told in the scriptures, better to cut off your arm if it sins or gouge out your eye and enter like that into the kingdom of heaven than not to enter it, but be whole, right? That's a massive topic, but since we're mentioning that, the sacraments are more important than exorcism. All right, exorcism isn't even a sacrament. Now, again, we Orthodox don't draw a hard line between sacraments and sacramentals. So in a sense, it would be, because it's a mystery of God. But it's not listed even didactically as one of the 7 sacraments. because it's things like baptism and like confession and communing are so much more important in spiritual warfare than just going out and chasing a demon. That's more like fixing your roof, you know, and the sacraments of building your house, right? You don't get richer by fixing your roof. You just try to stop more damage accruing. And that's an important thing to bear in mind. And people who have experience with the demonic, in the negative sense, not like a priest who would have experience with dealing with it, they tend to regret, because demons do offer you a lot. Especially, there are examples of people having preternatural knowledge. Sometimes it can be like languages, right? That's a very common one to hear. But even, you know, like knowing someone's sin, you know, like this was a Catholic priest I heard talk about this, an exorcist. We don't have exorcists per se, right? It's, you know, we don't have like orders and stuff. That doesn't really make sense in Orthodoxy. Shouldn't make sense in Catholicism either. But, you know, again, this was a Catholic, and I do believe people who are Catholic can battle the occult, despite the fact that they're not part of the true church, because it doesn't hate people outside of the church, and certainly will help them. But he says there was this woman who had all types of knowledge about people. She would just see them and can say, "Oh, your wife cheated on you with this person." First time she sees him, first time the man sees her. But then she would personally suffer greatly, like with night terrors and pains and stuff. But she doesn't want to get rid of it. And we have a very naive idea of humans. You know, we sort of forget the maliciousness of humanity. Like people are willing to suffer immensely for such petty gain, but that petty gain plays into their pride, right? Because she can say, I can ruin marriages with just a thought, you know, and that, and also I'm horrified with how we've turned women into children. In our minds, you're not going to do it in actuality. So that's not happening. But they forget the manipulation, the love of manipulation. As you said, like mothers-in-law have been a curse upon women since forever, and you know they tend to become it. Even when they hate their mother-in-law, they still become that mother-in-law.
Well, I mean, because that's where unless the man was fully aware of the influence of the mother-in-law and had forgiven and freed himself from that.
A lot of men are so enslaved to their mothers, like they can't raise their voice at them or anything. So that's also function, because that's then a man failing to do his duty and be the man.
It's crazy. He's not. There's so many stories where the man is not. I even have met people locally where the man seems to have the more love for the mother than for his own wife. You know, and it's kind of like weird and imbalanced, and you can see the wife kind of like feeling weird and suffering in some way as a result. And there's no. It's like he's deferring to the mother instead of forging ahead in the world and you know, creating his family.
This is very common, especially with single mothers who have sons. They sort of destroy everything except for them. They tend to, right? And also it depends on why they're a single mother, right? Being a widow is not the same as being a divorcee. So because then you're sort of dealing with what is the cause, what is the effect. And it's so unnatural. It's so, we shouldn't say unnatural as in like against natural law, because we know where that
leads. We're in another mess right there.
But it's so improper, let's say. But also people have become so weak in the sense that they're not willing to raise their voice against anything except for things they believe are allowed. So we see progressives have no shortage of claiming what they believe to be right, because the culture is not just permissive but very encouraging of it.
Yeah.
And we see all sorts of problems emanate from that, where no one's got a sense of, how should we say, things being proper. There's always just sloganeering and calls to actions for vague things. And so I don't know. I don't know. It's been very very confusing growing up, because we're now talking about like men being men and stuff. I remember my father telling me all types of things like, don't give in to women at all, in the sense of relationship. She says it's not going to be you take one step back and she wants 10 steps back. She says she's going to, if you take one step back, she's going to climb on your back and try to make you run in the opposite direction. And I always thought, yeah, boomers with their views on women. And then turns out, oof. So I was warned, and I didn't listen. But again, it's not about supremacy of either sex. I'm very, very annoyed by people who believe men are like superior to women. Like, no, you just as a man don't see how problematic things can be when you let me give you the example of one thing very common here in the Balkans, like and that's betting on like sports. So if you believe women are going to waste money on shoes and purses and clothing or whatever, well, that's at least something you gain, all right? As trivial as it might be, it's still better than just throwing money at a betting firm. So, right? But you say, oh yeah, but he can win money. Yeah, but he doesn't, does he? Right?
Yeah, exactly.
People who say there's a joke here, so I'll try to make it more understandable for the audience. Saying if you could win money on betting, Las Vegas would look like the rest of the desert in Nevada. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Right? It wouldn't be this giant enterprise. So okay, but so that's another thing. But we have so deteriorated in our understanding of what a human being is, what men and women are, and then you've got this now this just anti-woman movement as a response to feminism, which isn't a good movement. No. You're not supposed to be anti-woman. What's the point of that? What are you going to gain? You're supposed to call things out for the sake of calling things out. Sin is sin, and then there's sin men are prone to, and when women are prone to. And this is also what I keep hammering. Don't focus on things you're against. You're going to lose. There's no winning in that. You need to focus on Christ all the time. And then as a function of that, you need to battle things like feminism, which is rubbish. Sure. And as I said, I think that one of the most destructive things we have done is not to this, slay queen attitude towards women. I think it's the infantilization prior to that. Like, oh, they're these soft little does, prancing around. Like, no, they're not. That's rubbish. But it seems to me that that's what the conservative, allegedly, position is nowadays. Like, women are these, like, just children you have sex with, which should seem, problematic on its face.
Exactly, yeah. No.
But they're not. They're just smaller and don't tend to be physical with their malice. They tend to be manipulative. And we read all throughout, the writings of the church and even outside of Christianity, people address this. In Buddhism, the Buddha himself, said that a woman cannot achieve nirvana because she's so obsessed with sex. And nowadays, our cultural idea is sort of, you have to, treat women like they have no sexual appetite, but they're sort of doing you a favor. And it's not like that at all. But we just have to have this overlay of sort of secular conception of anthropology that's nowhere to be found in reality.
Yeah, women operate on a different level. I've heard so many stories where they're a group of women friends, but they're actually competing with each other and sleeping with each other's boyfriends and all kinds of madness, and in the public sphere, kind of presenting this other delicate, picture of themselves, And again, it's not to judge anybody, but just to point that out, to highlight what you're saying.
I do say it to judge.
Yeah. Well, there can be some deep, that malice and stuff, though. It can be that malice combined with manipulation. It can be nasty. I'd almost rather have a physical attack.
Yes, because you can deal with it. It's a present danger. It's sort of a subterfuge as opposed to warfare. That if you see an army, there's an army on the other side of that field. We're going to do this and that, and what are you going to do against subterfuge? Well, unless you figure out the plot, nothing, and it's just going to hit you. So that's also, and the fact that also men can be manipulated, women can be physical. There's no shortage of either. So we're not. We're not going to be silly people who just throw things into like a bin. Like, this is what women do, this is what men do. Like, no, there's massive overlap. Men can be manipulative, especially towards, we see it with the Tate phenomenon. The lover boy method is a method of human trafficking for a reason, and it requires manipulation on the part of men.
Yeah.
Also,
that's an interesting topic right there, man. That I don't want to go too deep with it, but that Tate thing is kind of fascinating, and I can't claim that he's guilty or anything, but seeing kind of a barrage of, and I haven't watched much of his stuff. I only became aware that of his existence maybe a month or two, but it's kind of a fascinating phenomenon. And I was also, he's held up sometimes by the so-called conservatives as some kind of hero. And I can't tell if he at some point he was claiming to be Orthodox, but he's surrounded by all these women massaging him while he's saying it.
Well, now he's doing the same thing, but with Islam.
Yeah. And I don't know if they're calling him out about it either, but I don't see that as being
the ones who, because Islam is collapsing and they're sort of desperate. So the ones who are honest and consistent are calling them out, but then the ones who are actually freaking out then attack the ones who are trying to be honest Muslims, because like he posted a picture of him in a giant like king size bed reading the Quran in his boxer shorts and placed like the Quran on his wiener. Like if I posted that, people would want my head. But like, oh, alhamdulillah, such beauty, oh, glorious, right? Because they're seeing it as he's influential, so he's going to bring more people into Islam. And as much as they're boastful, it's so problematic for them. I keep mentioning like over 30,000 mosques were closed in Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran. Prize fighting is haram in Islam, for your information. Thank you, Author Eric. That's a good point. Right. So not to mention all the Chechens then, who are very prominent in MMA and stuff. But it's really, how shall we say? Because we had the idea women manipulate, men fight, we then turn a blind eye, and feminists absolutely turn a blind eye to female violence, physical violence. No. And women don't, I mean, most often they slap you, right? But then they don't even have a concept of women like breaking ashtrays on your head and hitting you with like irons, like the ironing on an ironing board, that type of iron. And pans, and because you think, oh, you hit someone with a pan, what's the problem with that? It's not that big of a deal. It's literally a metal implement. Like, if you saw a police officer, especially the leftists, and a police officer hitting someone with a baton, like, oh, it's the worst thing in the world. There's such endless violence. Like, but you think a pan isn't a problem? Like, obviously, these people have never been hit, even accidentally, because they've never done any physical labor. But we are supposed to inhabit this reality in which we ignore the fact that men are manipulative as well, not as much, but as well. And women are also violent. And if you just do this whole categorization thing, you're going to miss almost as much problems as if you said no one ever does anything bad.
No.
Right? Because the phenomenon, as you said, conservatives supporting him. Why? To beat the feminists. How?
Yeah.
By supporting someone who is actually doing what they're complaining about? Like, how allegedly. How is that going to solve your problems? And it's not. It's actually going to end up being in their favor. And people like Tucker Carlson and Patrick Bet-David and what's the grifting black woman? Candace Owens. Right? So I remember her.
Did she champion him as well?
Oh, more so than anyone.
No, I didn't watch any of these long interviews.
I didn't. I watched reviews.
I can't stand the way he talks. His brother, I can tolerate the voice a little more, the accent, which shouldn't be a reason, I guess, but it was enough to not want to listen to the whole thing. But so I can't say for certain, but I'm surprised because Tucker's at least known for, or I knew him for pushing against people I wouldn't have expected him to push against, when they're like various conservatives who are war makers or pushing back on Trump on a few different issues, right to his face, or various people that he calls out. But I didn't get that vibe with this tape thing. And I thought either he didn't do his research or he's maybe he didn't, to his credit. But
I would believe that because I've been fascinated by him as a phenomenon, sort of like this rich, privileged guy who actually cares for his country and the working class. If that's not all a farce, I assume.
Sure.
But if we're trying to take him at his word, that is what he is.
Yeah.
And although his father worked for intelligence agencies, which is just like a Soviet-grade red flag.
Yeah, of course.
But that's what he's supposed to. But then he says that it was 2016 and the election that preceded it that really woke him up to what's actually going on. Mm-hmm. And the problem with people whose worldviews start to crack is that they start flailing. Mm-hmm. And then you start supporting people for the sake of supporting people who are against what you perceive to be as the biggest problem.
So the enemy of my enemy kind of thing.
Yes, which is a horrible thing to go by.
Yeah, exactly.
But I also I don't put my faith in princes, nor in television presenters. So
sure, yeah. Well, I'm not too harmed by the disappointment. I'll put it that way. But.
Yes, I think it would be bad because he wields so much influence, but when people like him and Candace Owens and Patrick Bet-David, who's supposed to be this conservative podcaster, and he just did a couple, and not just one, but a couple of podcasts with both of them. And if they get convicted, right, and it is proven in the court of law, which again, a lot of people are just going to say was all a product of bribery and stuff, and they're trying to destroy his pro-masculine message, which is just either he says things that are so low grade. Recently I saw someone either retweet him or something, saying like, "Oh, there's plenty of beautiful women, there's plenty of loyal women, but then the women who stay with you when your mind is breaking, that's the one." Like, how haven't you heard that a million times already? So it's just the most basic stuff. But then on the other side, if you want to have this like macho thing, there's also no shortage of those guys, and neither are trying to, I don't know, neither have been persecuted. But it just so happens that this guy that ran basically a porn business is being persecuted because he's breaking the matrix.
Yeah, it's like, and if he's able to so-called break them, if he's actually able to functionally break the matrix, and the proof of that would be what, his wealth and his status. Then, if we're talking about the matrix as the control scheme or whatever, however, it's not a completely coherent topic, but if that's his superpower that he's claiming and that people are claiming he has, how is that not able to defeat the Romanian legal system, which would be, a function of the matrix, right? Like, he's hacking the matrix, but their Mr. Smith was stronger,
He was bragging about bribing their officials.
Ooh, publicly, right?
Oh, yeah. No. How stupid are you? And he's playing 5D chess. He can't play bloody checkers. And he's playing 5D chess. It's honestly, it's a joke. But it's it's seriously unfunny, because it's not going to be nice when it breaks. But people do what they do. We started this from the point of Islam, and people are sort of thinking of it as this, that it's like a booster shot to take against progressivism, and it's just not. Okay? People are firing anti-hail missiles. I hear that. That's reassuring.
Anti-hail missiles. What is that?
Oh, you shoot these missiles into the clouds that you suspect to be hail clouds, and they're filled with a certain type of powder, and it when it blows up in the cloud, it doesn't allow it to be hail. You just get macerated. Well, that's a common thing. Maybe, you're from Minnesota. I doubt you had a lot of hailstorms there.
We did have hail. We did have hail once a few times, a certain time of year. I can't remember if it was spring or fall now. But yeah,
I always thought of it as too cold for such a thing.
No, it gets super hot in the summer, and then the divergence, or and in spring and fall, you could have it where in the morning it's, and I'm thinking in Fahrenheit now, so I can't give you this.
You can tell me the Fahrenheit. I have a general.
So let's say it could be 60, 70, 80 in the morning, and then down to like almost freezing at night. There was times like you leave the house on your bicycle as a kid and go far away, and then suddenly it gets to be like you're in the shade in the afternoon, and like, how am I going to get home? So you do have a huge, and so you'd have low and high pressure and low and high temperature systems,
the disparity,
just mashing into each other. Yeah, the disparity. That's the word.
Okay, that's when you get the hailstorms. Definitely. Yeah. But I mean, Ortho Eric says, look up Project HARP. It's spelled with two A's. Ortho Eric.
Because I'm aware Serbia, of it. Go ahead.
In Serbia, we talk about HARP all the time, because you have no idea how much paranoia you develop as a Serb. The Americans are trying to destroy us all, and HARP is everything. Like, we are OG like conspiracy theorists as a people. Probably only outdone by American blacks. Who, when you have literal, weapons tested on you. By your own government, okay.
Right. Yeah, when they were doing like, the what was that? The gonorrhea experiments and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, there's some crazy stuff back
It's dispiriting. But again, people who ignore such things, like, they're practicing for the general public. It's just that these people were at the time rather disliked, so no one cared if you tested on them. But when they get the knowledge, they're going to test it on you as well. So even if you're a racialist or some type, this is just on practical matters. This is something you should be completely against.
Yeah, of course. Regardless, for anyone doing that can't say any other humans. It just falls right into despicable territory. I mean, there's no justifications. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to say I forgive you, author Eric. He apologizes. See how the beauty of Christianity. I can talk for hours on like Serbian conspiracy theories, but it won't be very productive, because it becomes madness very quickly. But again, it's a function of being persecuted for every possible reason, for ethnicity, for being Christian, for being Orthodox Christian, for currently we are a non-NATO country surrounded by NATO countries, and our economy both relies on the EU and on Russia. Mm-hmm. So you can imagine how fun that is.
Yeah. Is Bosnia in the same situation as you guys?
Bosnia is
or even worse.
Bosnia is not really a country. It's sort of like people pretend like Iraq is a country, and it's not. It's like 12 tribes who hate each other. But Bosnia is like part Orthodox, part Muslim, and part Croatian Catholic. The Catholics, who all hate each other, and it's not supposed to be a state.
No.
And author Eric says, for not being Bulgarian, that's actually real. You might have said it as a joking thing. Maybe you haven't, but like in my part, like the southeast end, like definitely during both world wars, that was something we were persecuted for by Bulgarians. But it's Bosnia is sort of a mess. There's a meme, I can fix him, and it's just a map of Bosnia. There's no fixing it, because no one wants to give up on any territory, which is completely understandable. But at the same time, this sort of, how shall we say, when no one wants to pull back on anything, but they rely on each other to a certain extent, which is a big problem with all former member states of Yugoslavia, that communists literally built infrastructure, like economic infrastructure production, in a way that the nations would depend on each other. Yeah. Like, it was completely pointless. To have a processing plant, let's say in like eastern Serbia, and then the raw materials come from Montenegro, and then they get assembled somewhere in Croatia. Right? It was supposed to be a deliberate attempt to bind the countries together, but turns out no. And then when things fell apart, now you have a completely useless processing plant and stuff. Posh, sum up Hungary in one sentence. Asians. Right.
One word. Wow. Yeah, you went above and beyond.
I call them the most based Asians. Literally, I mean, descendants of the Huns. And you see, actually, they have problems with drinking, not as in amounts of drinking, as much as the classic Asian problem of not really being able to handle it. And so they get also the commensurate suicide rates. A huge part of why Serbia is so high up with suicide is literally if you remove the Hungarians, because we drop substantially on the suicide ledger. But but Hungarians generally. I was with a girl who's more than half Hungarian, but still, they're nice people. I don't understand why they eat so weirdly. Like
The hot
eating.
peppers and stuff are good. I like some of it. The
Oh
goulash,
yeah, that's also very
paprikash.
big in here. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's very big here as well, especially in my area of Serbia, which is famous for like pepper production, things like
Wow.
that, like Ivar and stuff.
Ivar, yeah, nice.
But they put sugar in literally everything. It's insane.
Oh yeah, I remember you mentioning that. Yeah.
Oh God. and so that ex-girlfriend of mine, she thought she was they were like weird and extreme compared to her because she's in Serbia, right? Grew up here and everything. And until she had family from Hungary visiting, and then they were eating like a spicy sausage in a sandwich that's cream spread, not cream spread. Sorry, chocolate spread. We call that creme. That's why I went for cream. Like chocolate spread sandwich with a spicy sausage in the middle. And first of all, that was a travesty to her, and to me, like that's like a death sentence, offense. So, goodness gracious, and we also, because we Serbs tend to be very tall, we make fun of Hungarians and Romanians for being short, because basically, we're surrounded by short people, Albanians, Bulgarians, Romanians, Hungarians, Macedonians, and then it's so funny to us that maybe I told you this joke my uncle made, because a different uncle was getting married to a woman who's half Macedonian, and this uncle that made the joke said, we can figure out easily who's on our side, who's on the bride's side. You just lean against the wall, and if they can pass beneath it, they're on the bright side. So that it's all fun. So I don't know. I have had positive experience with Hungarians. I have to say.
I have too. I've had a positive experience generally. Nothing ever negative came up. I could say that they didn't. It was harder to find people that spoke English than it was in Serbia, or than it is in Serbia or in Croatia.
Yeah,
Montenegro,
because Hungarian isn't even an Indo-European language.
Yeah.
Nor is Finnish. They're a language group of their own. So them transitioning into an Indo-European language is a much bigger leap than it would be for us.
Yeah, that makes sense. So apparently people in the chat know about the Hungarians with the paprika. Yeah, a lot of the people here will grow in this region too. I'm right on the border of Slavonia and Bodnia, and then Bodnia extends into Hungary, and apparently was part of that empire at some point. But
so Croatia was generally part of Hungary.
Yeah,
all of it.
Yeah. Well, I suppose at some point. I did meet a guy at the Hungarian gas station that was saying, I was on my way to Vienna, and he was saying, he could speak very good English, a young man, but he was sort of lamenting while he was filling the car with gas about how much lost territory there is that should still belong to Hungary, and I just...
they were like Vojvodina as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. He mentioned Vojvodina, he mentioned parts of Vienna, or like to the west. I don't remember if he said Vienna, but I think it was parts of Austria,
probably.
Let's say, and then Bodnia as well.
Yeah, because but that's what you get, for joining up with the Germans. No one made you do it. In fact, I think I mentioned this. This is the first time Hungary came up. That the Hungarian minister of Foreign Affairs in the Second World War gave his word, his guarantee that Hungary will not attack Serbia. And when Hungary did attack Serbia, he committed suicide as a point of pride. And he's seen as basically almost a national hero here, you know. Very highly, because, you know, when someone is so embarrassed by not keeping his word, but not being able to, you know, it's not like he didn't try, but he saw it as a point of pride that if his word meant so little that there's no point in living. But, you know, it's that went dark very quickly. So sorry about that.
That's fine. There's nothing too dark. I mean, that's a point that I think is a fair point. I've had people mention that to me, and when I bring up different topics as well. And it's not like I'm running around trying to throw memento mori in everyone's face, but when people think that something's too dark, and I'm not talking about dark in a you know, like vulgar kind of talking shit sense, but meaning facing these our mortality and these kind of topics. It's like if we have death, which it looks like we clearly do, staring us down on one end of this life, then, you know, what topic could be too dark to bring up, to discuss? I think it's useful to be able to go to those depths and at least have a conversation about it.
Yeah, at least acknowledge them. And for some people, they shouldn't dwell too much on it, right? So if you have a very happy, optimistic person like myself, you know, I don't have a. It doesn't weigh on me too heavily. But then you have very light-spirited people, you know, who, if they dwell too much on it, can really weigh them down. And I guess they shouldn't. There's nothing too dark. Who is this? Yeah, I think you explained it. Well, but
I hope I addressed the concern, but also the name of the person is sort of ironic. Draconian methods. Who is this? Lucifer? You know.
Okay, Draco.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, but I also fear that we're not addressing dark topics enough.
That's what I mean. Is that
there's
sweetness and light?
Because I think it breeds a naivete that's very dangerous. That you don't actually, if you don't address these dark things, you know, they're not going away, you know, but then you're sort of shocked that the world is actually much darker than you thought it was.
Right. So people go into this, I call it something like that, the tomb of familiarity. I like that term, where you try to kind of keep the decorations the same and pretend you're not aging, and people even dye the hair, you know what I mean, to keep it looking like it did at a certain point. And then inevitably something shatters into that tomb. Something breaks in through the, you know, there's no windows in there, to go with the metaphor, but something, suddenly light just casts into this tomb of familiarity, and you see everything's covered in dust, and people have aged and they've lost abilities, and somebody dies, you know, generally, and haven't confronted anything outside of this tomb where they're actually hiding out from death. You know, it's like a sort of a ridiculous situation, but I understand how it arises. But we want to be able to bring those things into awareness, you know.
Yep. Again, not dwell on them too much.
Sure.
Because for a multiplicity of reasons, you know, it could be just, you know, not just darkness that engulfs you in the sense of you become gloomy.
Right, like the
but
black
you can become
kind of thing,
yes, but you can become vengeful. You can become angry, and rage isn't going to really help you much. That's a playground for the demonic.
That's how people they justify anger, but they're not looking at how a family man decides to go punch somebody, and then now both people's lives are over. it can happen in an instant.
Yes, and the problem is that for us, evil has become almost an abstract thing. Right, throughout history, people had to deal with death and destruction all the time. Right, it was a very rare exception that you didn't. Like a lot of people lost family very young. Not, I don't mean the entire family, but family members very young, and that doesn't allow you to be this very naive person, because it really can be painful. So nowadays, where people live very long because all types of maladies can be held at bay, and we sort of think something has to push you to be evil, and it has to be extraordinary, right? So nowadays you think of profit, capitalists just want profit, that is evil. Like, sure, but then they will think that people will only rob, all right, stores and mug passers-by only because they're desperate.
Right.
But no, I keep maintaining the idea, like, you have all types of people, like when you're buying sand for a construction project, and sand is sold by tons, right? And there are people who add water to add to the weight. And sand is excellent at retaining water. So you can't just say, oh, it's supposed to be, dry all the way through, because that's just not going to happen. So you sort of have a plausible deniability. But the type of person who does that, and the type of person who runs a bank and like crashes a nation's economy to then buy things very cheaply, like that's the same person, but with different levels of either competence or just position. Like the amount of power they have at their fingertips is what determines how much they will scam. But if you're going to scam on a small scale, that's no different than wanting to scam on a large scale. It's morally, both are morally repugnant. And unless you get into consequentialism, you're going to have a problem saying one is worse than the other. But because of that, you have the whole idea, you shouldn't punish like muggers. Have you seen like these robbing sprees?
Yeah, it's crazy, man. It's crazy. Yeah, and then some of these people are getting let out of jail or not prosecuted because slavery or because
because you have Soros funded. Speaking of Hungary, Garrett Soros. So Soros funded district attorneys who refuse to prosecute. And then, you have people. There was that case of a man who had a huge police record in Chicago. But then at one point, he was fleeing the police and bragged about if they catch him, he'll be out within the day. But the problem is, as he was trying to escape the police, he went into like a county outside of Chicago. And the police there were not under the jurisdiction of the DA for Chicago, so he got 22 years. But and again, these people know that they're not going to be caught. So where's this Aladdin factor? We're just stealing bread for the little ones, right? No. And then you have also this progressive hatred of like high-end stores, even though they all buy high-end stuff or artisanal stuff, which tends to be even more expensive. Right. So you had recently these sprees exacted on. One was a Gucci store, so like the most fancy of the fancy nonsense. And the other one was Nordstrom. Is that what it's called? So high-end malls, right? Like the rich man's. I keep forgetting. I want to say Target, but Target is also rather high-end, isn't it?
Target is lower. Target is lower. Target I think it was either founded or run from the actual city I was born in, or not born in, that I grew up in Fridley, Minnesota. So we had Target there. And they were like, Kmart was like the main competition, but Kmart was like a little bit more low grade.
But what's the really like the redneck store?
I mean, Walmart?
Walmart. That's the one.
Okay.
I don't know why I couldn't remember. It's like a rich man's Walmart.
Yeah, okay.
They
Yeah,
say,
yeah,
oh, but those are rich stores, right? So okay, these are just desperate people robbing a rich store, right? Because they're desperate, and the people can take it, right? The rich ones can take it. The problem being, first of all, you will hear of someone robbing a Gucci or a Nordstrom. You will not hear them robbing like a small family-owned shop.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not going to make the news. So when you interact with the news, this is a huge thing, like survivor's bias. I'll talk about it a bit later, but you have you only hear of very popular places, rich places being robbed. So you think that's the only thing that's being robbed? No, we've seen the bodegas in New York getting robbed. Like that's as poor as you're going to get, right? These small little shops with barely anything in them, like being robbed, and immigrant owned. And when the immigrant who was was some elderly man, like with some I don't know, Puerto Rico or somewhere, like some Latino nation, like over 60 years old, was getting roughed up by this black gentleman, and he sort of takes out a knife and stabs him, and he dies. And all of a sudden, right, and all of a sudden, there goes all our lovely immigrants who, they just wanted help around. You have an example of that, exactly that. Like he has his own thing. He's trying to work. He's like, and he's defending himself. And all of a sudden, that doesn't matter. Like I think he ended up in jail. It's a travesty, but it's all because the poor people, and this is a poor black person, right? So even worse. Because we don't understand the malice. We don't want to actually appreciate the fact that there is a malice in people and that you don't only rob for the sake of survival. And by the way, how do you then explain middle and upper class criminals? Right, okay, they will maybe say, upper class, you get so rich, you don't care about anything, right? You become a psychopath. But what about middle class criminals? What do they do? And also, it's sort of, again, cause and effect, which is the whole survivor bias thing. Like, it's not necessarily that you are middle class and therefore you don't do crime. You don't commit crimes, right? It's in order to be middle class and stay middle class, you're going to have a certain qualities, right?
Yeah.
Go into certain fields, have an education, and you're not going to squander that to mug like poor people. That's not something you're going to do, because the risk reward factor is just insanely tilted towards risk. And when I mentioned survivor's bias, this comes from the idea that when you had in World War II planes returning from missions, they would see a lot of holes in certain areas, so they reinforced those areas. But then, sort of figured out, well, wait, these are the ones that came back, which means they can actually sustain more damage in those areas and still be able to fly. So you're not reinforced. The ones that were downed were hit in different areas that were more crucial. Mm-hmm. That's where you get the idea of survivor's bias. But I also think of it as, in more modern terms, Edmar Vasquez says, I live in Puerto Rico and a lot of good and normal people basically steal water and electricity. Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm. But it's not out of desperation. It's also, it can be like sometimes people are desperate and do things out of desperation. But it's just, you save more money. It's cheaper. You get free stuff. who doesn't like
And
free
once
stuff.
you do it, and I when I was a young anarchist over 25 years ago, there were times of where I stole food and different things, and I had this whole justification scheme in my head about, oh, these are big corporations and they have insurance to cover this, and no one asked me if I want to be a part of this system anyway, all this kind of stuff. But it was all just because I didn't know how or want to do what it took to make money to buy those things. And then once you go down that road, to get myself back out of that, then once you know you're capable of it, was very difficult, to actually return to like paying for things. And I didn't have any kind of moral guidance going on besides some vague idea of good and fighting the state or whatever it was.
Private property.
Yeah.
Maybe you weren't that type of anarchist. Maybe you were the more.
No, I was like a primitivist.
Oh God.
The green.
I know. And you use the stick, and then other ones say, "Oh no, that's technology."
Yeah, exactly. I even had some letters back and forth. Letters back and forth with Ted K. The Uncle Ted. But
okay. I'm vaguely aware of him. So.
Although he actually went and lived in the wild, so to his
credit, that's a prop. Yes.
Yeah.
But also, it's sort of like saying vegans are annoying. But is it that vegans are annoying, or is it only the annoying people who are vegans are annoying you? Because a person who's pretty much, how shall we say? I wouldn't even say humble, but sort of like they don't care about bragging about it. They just think, oh, this is what I do, so be it. Like, they're not going to go around telling people, because that's exactly what type of person they are. And the thing is, that happens with everyone. Like, if you have quiet people who do one thing and loud people who do one thing, you're only ever going to hear from the loud people. And then you have the idea that people who do the thing are loud.
Of course.
That's sort of the survivor's bias thing that I'm talking about. You only ever interface with certain movements or philosophies by means of people who are more open about it. Right, I keep always making jokes about dog people, but most people who own dogs are just like, "Hey, this is my dog. I like to play with him and stuff." Right, but then you go, "Oh my God, the furry angels!" Right, the insane people. So I'm perfectly aware that I'm making a joke, right? Yeah. But you could, if you're not, if you're not aware of it, you could actually fall into the idea that people who own dogs are insane, because that's what I keep seeing online, and the amount of people, especially recently, I keep seeing, who post such insane things like, "This is animal abuse," for like, the meme of like when your cat is like eating and stuff, you place a cucumber behind it. And when it turns around, it's yeah. And when they turn around, they freak out and just jump. And obviously, nonsense humor. It's silly, just silly. Which I appreciate. I do like purely silly humor. But that type of thing, and I was watching this compilation of like videos, and then you have the, they put sticky notes on the paws of like cats, and they sort of walk funny, or sometimes they just have running around, freaking out like, what's going on? And then you look at the comments, and it's like, that animal trusted you, and you broke its trust. How dare you? How broke its trust? You put sticky notes on it. Like, has anyone ever seen how animals play?
Yeah.
Like, cats and dogs, since they're pups and kits, very small. Like, I've got a couple right now. They're a few months old now, but when they were very, very little, they just stopped fighting all the time.
Yeah.
Because it's normal. As we as children used to, scuffle all the time, snowball fights and stuff.
Oh yeah.
Until someone puts, a piece of ice in it.
We used to put ice in there, or dog. We put dog shit in the snowballs too. Yeah, all kinds of things.
And yellow snow and stuff. So there are exceptions. Someone can take it too far, but really sticky notes. That's the evil that's being inflicted visited upon the feline.
It's not like the old shows, or like when they used to make movies. What was that? The Mr. Ed or something. I guess they had some. They were fucking with his mouth really bad, like the Talking Horse show from the 50s or something. And there's some old horror stories about. Okay. There's some like it's one of the reasons why at the end of every movie you'll see no animal was harmed in the course of this production, because there used to be like crazy ways of training and keeping the animals and then making them do things on cue.
Okay. Oof.
So it's not the same as sticky notes. So yeah.
So a bit of a difference, but yes, and like the dog whisperer fellow, like he had these. Was called on a case where these people were equestrians, like they were owned and bred horses, right? And they had these two big dogs. And they would chase around the horses, and the horses would freak out. And by the way, you don't want to mess with horses. Like, they're giant animals, and they kick. And if they hit the dog, like, that's it for the dog. So they called him, and he did this, that thing where he pinches them on the neck and sort of does that. Because apparently that's what you will find in the wild dogs doing, and wolves. Right. Yeah. Just a nib on the neck as a warning.
That's too, I think. Yeah.
And people freaked out about that. And the thing that happens was this big dog was sort of barking at him. He sort of approaches it, like makes himself big, pinches the dog once. The dog stays quiet. Doesn't figure out what's happening, and then starts running away. And in like 3 or 4 more pinches, the dog was calm. And so you think a couple of pinches are probably better than getting kicked by a horse and having your skeletal system shattered into a million pieces. But it doesn't matter to these people, because they're so bourgeois in the negative sense of the word, that they literally cannot perceive of anything ever being wrong, except for any level of violence. I suppose pinching someone could be violent, even though it avoids greater violence. They just have no concept of it. It's just everything is always fine and dandy.
So I've got to say, I've got to go like in another few minutes here, but this is really fun. And there's some topics that I think we can cover next week if we figure out a time. But I did want to touch on that. We don't have time to do it now, but maybe next week we can start one with that Ra Uru Hu and look at this human design. It's been. Did you get the chance to look at that at all?
Very briefly, not really. I tend to be, when Jim Bob sends me like an hour thing that he wants us to review, it takes me like 3 days to get through it, because I watch it for like 10 minutes and then freak out for 3 hours and just being angry. So,
I think we can just kind of skip around and pick and choose. And my point of view here will be a little different than Jim Bob's. I just want to highlight and look at, generally kind of look at these typology systems that people are so addicted to: psychology tests, personality disorder tests, and human typology systems. And this human design is like, to me, looks like a syncretic version of, why don't we watch just the beginning seconds of it, and then as like a preview. for next week, because I thought I got the impression he received the system from a demon or something right off the bat, because it was like received well, anyway, we'll just see let's see how it comes up, just so I can test this anyway. What do we select? We select share screen. Share screen. Okay.
Has to be in a separate window.
Okay, so Google Chrome would like to record this computer screen and audio. I'll click Open System Settings, say yes. Okay, type in my password. I forgot the last time I did that was on the other. Okay, may not be able to share until later. Let's see, for human design. Okay, it looks like it'll still work. Let's try this. Chrome tab. I'm gonna click on this guy. And how do we put our? Oh, okay, it automatically shifted for us. Okay, so yeah, let's just watch just a tiny bit of it, and then I'll have to go like in a few minutes, but we can just touch on it, and then we'll go deeper into this later. And I want to examine worldviews generally and kind of give people who aren't familiar with it, because that really helped me hearing you and Jim Bob go into that over time, and then also specifically these worldviews around these type of systems and why they're so alluring to people. And this human design thing, I see tons of people on Facebook, and I guess it's kind of like blowing up now. Like everybody's a practitioner, and it's essentially like some kind of blown up version of astrology, because it's based on your birth date, your birth location, and time, and then it gives you a whole series of things. And anyway, so this is just a taste, a preview. Let's see what we got here. You hear it fine? Yeah. And just say when you want me to pause it if we want to say something. Well, let's go like this. How do I make it full screen?
First thing that I want to tell you is that I don't want you to believe anything that I say, nor to trust me. The human design system is an empirical system. It's something that proves itself. Anybody who has ever worked with it knows that. So it's something for you to wait and see. I'm going to take you through a great deal of information. Before I do that, on the 3rd of January, 1987, until the 11th of January, 1987, on the island of Ibiza in the Mediterranean, I was penetrated by a voice. I was given all of this information. So I'm a messenger in this case, and I'm just here to share with you the knowledge that was given to me, and this knowledge is the human design system.
That's a good enough place to stop.
It's the meme, it came to me in a dream, but as your epistemological standard.
I think at that time in the 80s in Ibiza, there was a chance he was penetrated by more than just a voice. But yeah.
Oh yeah, I do love when they just insert such when it's obviously not a necessary phrase to use. Yeah. So I think there's intent behind it. Is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Conscious or subconscious, or something. But yeah. It'll come out. The truth comes out. Yeah, so that's how he begins, and then I haven't gone super deep with it yet either. I watched some of the other. Shame says Owen's going to have this guy on soon. I don't know. I think the guy's still out there, but his system caught on, and now lots of people are becoming coaches in it, and they have all these. Kind of like what sign are you? But now it's like a complicated version of the same thing.
Yes. It's like what Christian Science is, but applied to astrology. So it's a mess. I understand. It's not as ethereal. It has like I don't know, like people who try to argue that because we have such long guts, we're not supposed to eat meat. It sort of kind of makes sense, but then not really. Yeah. Right. It has this veneer of truth to it.
Yeah, and that's the danger of some of these systems. He starts the presentation going into the Big Bang, so we're going to have some fun.
Oh, great!
But yeah, so next week we can look at that hopefully Tuesday, but I'll message you. We'll figure out a
Okay.
time.
Okay.
But thanks for coming on today, man. This has been nice. It's getting really warm inside the house here. Yeah, this is great. This was a great conversation. It wasn't exactly what I expected, but I kind of appreciate that.
Yeah, we sort of went with the flow.
Yeah, in a decent way. Thanks to the folks in the chat for showing up too. This is kind of cool, seeing folks appear, and especially during the day like this. So yeah, I'm impressed. Posh 2.0 even made an appearance. I see. I like this character. What a guy.
Yeah. As I said, I still don't know who that is, and I don't want to know. I want it to stay a mystery because.
Yeah, that's a lot of fun. Yeah, that's someone from the future. It's here. It's a sign of a proof of evolution, Posh. Yeah.
Oh well, if it's 2.0, it means improvements have been made. That's an important thing. And there's plenty to improve, let me tell you.
Oh man, yeah. Lord have mercy. Okay, man. Well, really, really, thanks. Nice to see you. And I still will make my way out to your region, but I did make the decision to wait till the heat subsides, because if
Right.
you're if I'm already complaining about the heat here, then I don't need to go make it worse. But yeah, I will be out there.
I think starting next week it's going to be like under 30. So that's pretty decent temperature, to handle. But look at the forecasts for niche and stuff, because it's not going to be as hot anymore. Very low likelihood, actually. It's still going to be hot, but just not like murderously so.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Well, thanks again, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you. God bless.
All right. God bless. Enjoy.